everyone. Welcome back to another episode of AEC Marketing for Principals. Thank you for tuning in, and let me go ahead and give a disclaimer. I'm sorry for my voice. I am fighting a little bit of a sinus infection, but the show must go on. We have great things to talk about, and today we are continuing with our 2026 season all about change makers, talking with people that have ideas on how we are reshaping how the global industry of AEC grows, how we lead with intention, how we differentiate in the market. And I did not want to put today's guest on for a redo. So we're moving forward because today I'm joined by Emily Cannon, who just stepped into a new role of Vice President of Brand Strategy. This signals something really important that we should all be listening to. And that is brand is not just a support function anymore. It is truly a strategic lever for change. We all know the brand Brasfield Gorrie. We've been looking at them for a long time. We try to look at them at the litmus test on what's going to stay and what's a trend. And I know I spend a lot of time working with different firms wanting to know the ins and outs on how they achieve such a strong brand over there. So Emily, I'm super excited to talk about what this move means for you, for the firm, probably for the industry, and kind of get your perspective on what you think it can do in terms of doing things right and driving alignment, trust, and momentum from the inside out. So, Emily, thank you so much for taking time to talk with me today and coming on the show.
Oh, I'm so honored to be here. Everything you described is, I think a lot about most of those topics. And I think we've got it's a really exciting time in the industry. AI certainly is on the forefront of everybody's mind. And so figuring out how to position ourselves within that framework is really important.
It is. It's a whole new frontier. It's a little bit like the Wild Wild West, but also, we're kind of dealing with the matrix and what does the future look like with all of the robots. And I think all of our listeners probably know Brasfield Gorrie. I mean, we all know you as being one of the largest, most respected, privately held construction firms in the US. You've been around for a really long time, and you're operating basically all across the Southeast, maybe more now, and thousands of employees, billions with a B dollars of investment revenue each year. And I know you have a really broad set of markets that you serve: public, private, lots of institutional. You're always ranked in the top. Again, your reputation for quality, culture, and trust really makes you that benchmark that everybody looks towards. So all that's behind us, right? You got this great pedigree, this great resume. I really want to hear more about this new role that you've stepped in, this new role of VP of Brand Strategy. Let's talk about how does that fit into a firm at the scale of Brasfield, and what does that really signify in terms of the new direction underneath your new leadership? And you don't get these VP level roles just thrown out. It's not just because it's a new year, but it was really insightful. I'm sure there was a lot of things at stake and a lot of things that really came to play that made this change necessary. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure thing. There is plenty about what you just teed up that we are still defining and figuring out, but I can sort of give you the elevator pitch as it stands today. Brand strategy we're looking at it as bringing into the forefront a lot of really important work that had been happening in the margins.
Okay.
Up against deadlines, things that had to be done to enable something else that was a priority, but that maybe we hadn't been dedicating the proper skill, attention, time, focus to.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so 2 years ago, we did a big brand overhaul and launched a new website. With that is visuals and verbal identity and the whole package. And, to hear particularly our CEO and our current executive team tell it, we're about 15 degrees off of what feels really authentic to who we are. And so, with that, we have had a series of really in-depth discussions with those folks. So a number of the people who sit on our executive team to try to define, who it is we are, what it is we want that to look like and feel like and sound like, and how do we get there?
Yeah.
And, at a certain point, it's interesting what our competition in the industry is doing. And at a certain point, we kind of don't care.
You're going to be you.
We're looking at the big names that, the Apple and the Nike and the Tesla of like, what is capturing attention and resonating with people for brand loyalty, regardless of industry, regardless of how people purchase that thing, and trying to find not everything that Nike does or everything that Apple does is going to resonate with what it is that we do. And so, really just trying to find what it is that we can take away from that. And so, working with some great inspiration. About a year ago, we brought a creative director on board who had been, in the agency space for a career. And, he and I have we've had a great partnership. He has brought some really great change and perspective to how we do things creatively and what that workflow looks like.
Yeah.
Where do you bring in a creative mind? What questions are we asking? And so I think, his and my rapport and work sessions kind of led to some of this, but to look at the brand as an influencer to shape, attitudes, perceptions, not only outside of the company, but within the company. And so, current employees' attitudes, retention is obviously a huge component of this. Of course, recruiting sort of hand in hand with that.
Right.
But I mean, if you start to talk about certain things and celebrate certain things, I feel like you've seen this with safety and with innovation over the last couple of, decade or so. Everybody was talking about safety because we all stepped up our game in safety. And then it became really important that we all talk about innovation because we had to prove that we had the robots and we had the drones to be considered innovative. And, all of those things really are table stakes in kind of the field we play in now.
For sure. Yeah.
And so to think about, okay, what is the attitude that it takes? There's got to be a level of confidence and there's got to be a level of risk taking to kind of go out and do the things that we're required to do every day. So I think you'll start to see us celebrating that in a different way than we have before.
One of the things that I've always appreciated when I've been able to work alongside Emily, you and your team, and the technical professionals that you all employ over at Brasfield is, very much like every other firm that I work with in design and construction, you had some very ambitious founders, that put their name on the door and put their reputation at stake to start something new. And little by little, they, became known and became trusted and started to kind of make a name for themselves. They built a reputation. They grew beyond themselves, but they never lost sight of who they intended to be. And I've kind of witnessed that as the Brasfield Gorrie brand evolves. You kind of stay true to who you were, but with the right lens into where you need to evolve into. And so it's not completely ignoring the fact that you got to step up your safety game or that you got to bring innovation into the fold or the diversity piece or whatever else it might be. But you've never really tried to chase the fancy new shiny thing for the sake of chasing it. And I think you've done a really, really good job internally communicating, reinforcing, inspiring, I guess, the B&G way, what makes you guys bleed blue and what makes everybody really understand why you're different, better, and special than the other contractors out there. And I think you see that when you work across offices, across markets, across the different teams within your organization. And then that breeds into external customer experience, where I know you guys get invited to projects just based on the power of your brand and the power of your reputation. And they expect whatever that experience was at XYZ project to transplant over, and you execute it so well. And that does not happen without means and methods internally and strong alignment and strong communication. But that's just something that I wanted to bring up. I think a lot of our listeners would aspire for that as they're in moments of change, whether it's new leadership or maybe there's been a merger and acquisition, or they're adding new services, new offices, and they're trying to make sure they keep what makes them special, but add enough variety where it's relevant for, who's in that office, who's servicing those clients, the clients that they're serving, so that they still feel fresh and customer centric.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, capturing that and maintaining it is a major priority.
Yeah.
It's yes. It are two different things. It are both major priorities. And I think there's also got to be, you've got to leave the space, exactly to your point, of what we're doing in the Carolinas and what we're doing in Texas and what we're doing in Florida cannot and should not be cookie cutter.
Yeah.
You've got to have the authenticity of what is going on in that market, of who the people are there. And I think, really celebrating that is something that has been so at the forefront, particularly of our CEO's mind. A lot of what we're doing right now, I talked about kind of changing attitude, or not changing attitudes, but influencing attitudes. Right. And, he talks a lot about, and a lot of people do, celebrating the people who really make it possible for us to have jobs. So I sit in a corporate role for a construction company. And the only reason that I can sit in a corporate role is because we have incredible people every day who are on these job sites making these projects come to life. Yeah. And, being able to put them and their effort and their contribution really at the center of what we celebrate and of what we talk about and who we are is so critical. The shiny offices are great, but that's not our business. And, I think seeing that as the why then also allows, it sort of fulfills the need of the retention and the recruiting, because people understand that the work that they're doing is valued and is celebrated. And so we've got some fun things going on to celebrate, the people who power Brasfield and Gorrie. I don't, if you've caught our LinkedIn or our Instagram recently, we just rolled out a employee prize program we're calling the Power Build Sweepstakes. We have a pretty fun host. We're kind of leaning into the hokiness of, the game shows of several decades ago. And it was really all born of an idea of Rob wanting to celebrate the people who do the most every day.
Well, I think that's a great segue. So you've got this big vision. You are launching with a very fun, you guys kind of always go the little cheeky kind of commercial thing with some of your specialty campaigns throughout the year. I think about your Christmas cards and some of those other things that feel a little bit more personable and, kind of, not that you're not professional, but just a little bit more humorous and human. So I love the sweepstakes piece, and it's, it's the new year, all these new goals, and super, super fun. So let's maybe switch gears and talk about how do you take this vision? How do you translate it, like tactically, like in the weeds? How are you bringing that to life? Because I know lots of people have these great grandiose why statements, and they think they have a brand strategy, but trying to get everybody like in the boat, much less like rowing the same way around it, is a whole different kind of challenge. So what does brand alignment really look like at scale for you and your team at Brasfield, and kind of how are you approaching that? You mentioned a little bit earlier, you felt your team felt like it was a little bit off, maybe the messaging wasn't right, the visuals weren't right, like something just didn't feel quite right. But how do you really make sure that alignment is clicking?
Sure. I mentioned that we've been meeting pretty regularly with a good segment of our executive team, just about monthly over the last, I would say, 6 or 8 months. And I think that alone is the crux of the alignment. Those are conversations that if they had been happening before, I hadn't necessarily been privy to them. And so it's been really valuable. Myself, our creative director, my VP of communications counterpart have been in those rooms. And I think I certainly have been very mindful that we are here to figure out what's next. We are, it's so helpful to hear what they feel like is or isn't working, or does or doesn't resonate. And the whole point of those work sessions is, let's figure out what does, let's take apart what doesn't.
Okay.
And not, anything is on the table, like, let's dream a little, let's imagine for a moment, what could we be doing that we're not? And I think having the attention and the time investment that group had to this is enormous. To have leadership be invested in paying attention to what we're doing in this space and to give the time and the thoughtfulness. There's text messages flying back and forth about what is catching their attention on Instagram, or, they see a video. So it's so helpful to understand what they are paying attention to.
So,
and
go ahead. Keep going.
I was just going to say, I think that is probably not a conversation, and the makeup of a room is not happening as often as it should in most places.
Yeah.
Especially in this industry, to your point, where, sometimes you've got C-suite that just doesn't fully understand what is possible when you've got a team in place to focus on those things. It's so much more than the job site fencing. It's so much more than a good looking proposal. It's so much more than like a slick website.
Yeah. I think,
and especially right now, to your point about we have some fun, that is intentional. Like, we are trying to show that we are the humans that we are, that we have a good time together. There was this notion going around that we're not a suit and tie company, and it really is true.
Yeah.
This is in the mud, and you're up early pouring concrete, but making sure that we are in step with what leadership is envisioning and where they're looking in terms of priorities. That is really, I think, the root of that alignment.
I think the alignment is right in that it starts at the top, and the more and more firms will open up those discussions to include marketing leadership, whether it's, a marketing director, someone has a VP of marketing, or someone, at your level where there's a chief marketing officer, VP of brand, you're just going to get, I think, better alignment when more parties are around the table. And you're right. I think all too often those conversations happen in silos, one off, and there's a lot that gets lost and doesn't get shared between the different groups. You miss out on a lot of collaboration. You miss out on a lot of opportunity of, different perspectives. So having gone through this, Emily, are there any surprised participants that you felt like really were thoughtful or impactful at having around the table as you were really looking to ensure, alignment? Because you named some of the ones, but they all felt like they lived kind of what I would say on the marketing side of the house, not so much on maybe operations or more corporate leadership.
Yeah. So the folks that I named are also part of those meetings. And so it's our CEO, our chief strategy officer, a couple of our regional presidents, and a senior vice president who all of those functions report up to. And I think that has been, the regional presidents can really, really speak to what are the divisions needing? Yeah. What are their location, a little bit more location specific, like we talked about. And so it gives us a pretty wide lens of leadership. And I think that has been really valuable. And, we also just, I think, benefit from having this group who has very close relationships. And so, to your point, some of these conversations happening in silos, I think that has absolutely been the case. And now that we've been able to sort of join that silo, we can do something about it. As opposed to just if you've got a couple people in leadership who, maybe you're seeing things that they don't quite feel is aligned with either what they're hoping to see or what the clients are looking to see, or where the direction of the company is going. But if that's not being taken to the people who, put that out there, I think it just causes frustration, frankly.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong. Candidly, I'm still very, very much wrestling between how much are we sort of taking direction and like executing on that versus where do we feel like advising, if something, is in one direction or another. And I think that's just always a fine balance.
Yeah.
I think it's always a fine balance, regardless of industry, in a role like this, that you've got people who come to the table with ideas that, for one of maybe many reasons, just is the direction that you feel like we should take things.
Yeah.
And it's figuring out how to come to a conclusion that, kind of works all the way around.
Yeah. I think that's great. And yeah, in our industry, there's going to be those moments where marketing gets to drive strategy and kind of be in the driver's seat and make those suggestions and kind of shape it. And then other times where it's like, I'm going to support where you're going for it. I'm going to make it happen. Right.
Yeah.
And it is, we call those situationships. And when you've made it to the table and you're part of the room, you will intuitively know which way you're going to lean into. I trust.
And I'll be the first to say, I am in a lot of cases not our target demographic. And so I don't know what might work. And so I have become, I think, more and more willing to let's give it a try and see what we find out, because, I certainly am not in a place where I feel like I can speak in representation of a lot of the groups we're looking at talking to.
Yeah. Sometimes that's hard for a lot of us, is to remove the fact that we are not the ideal target any longer, whether it's senior leadership that's thinking about recruitment and how they were recruited, 20, 30 years ago. Right. It's different, whether it's, the modern day marketer or whatever it might be. And so sometimes it's just swallowing that pill and realizing this is not for me, but I know well enough to know that this is some things to consider. And so, yes, being bold, trying something new. When it doesn't work, like you mentioned, take it apart, unpack it. Why didn't it work? What can we do different? If it is working, how do we dial it up? How do we, amplify that?
I think the filter and the litmus test, which is tempting for a marketer to think this isn't something that I like, is not always the best talent.
Yeah. Sometimes you're going to do some things and you might wonder, why am I doing this? And then on the backside, you're going to go, that's why I did it. It worked. And that's great.
Right. Or it didn't. And now we all have good lessons. I think there's a lot to learn both ways.
So, Emily, for our listeners that might find themselves, in senior leadership positions within the marketing departments, or maybe they're just in leadership positions and they're representing their region, their discipline, their office, whatever it might be. What is something that you would tell them to try to do this year to better align with their brand strategy? What's one practical?
That's a great question.
Piece of it.
That's a great question. I think it depends so heavily on who you're trying to align with. And I think I can speak both out of the lens of some things that I've maybe done well and some things that I maybe could have done better in the past. And I think being able to come to that conversation, certainly to facilitate that conversation to start with in a way that is open and collaborative and not, you're really there to listen, that you're not defending what's been done, that you're not eagerly trying to say why something can't be done. Because let me tell you, I've seen a lot of things pulled off that my initial reaction would have been like, oh, I don't know if we can make that work. But I think if you can frame it in your own mind of why couldn't it be done?
Yeah.
Or what more could be done? How could we do this differently? Go in as an investigator, go in asking as a reporter to really understand and it not be entirely about your own agenda and your own preferences.
We might have shared a similar mentor, Emily, because I kind of grew up in the age of AEC marketing where the answer was always yes. And, you didn't sit there and say that can't be done, but it was to try to figure out how to make it happen. And the answer might be, yes, we can do it, but I need more time or more money, or I need someone else to take this off my plate for me to focus exclusively on it. Or we have to reprioritize things. But the whole idea of don't discount something just at face value, turn over the stones, do the work, figure it out.
Right.
Give it a chance before you say no.
Yep. Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I mean, again, I mentioned AI early on. I think that is really one great way to leverage that tool is to investigate, to research, to start to figure some things out in a much faster and more efficient way than we could have, a couple of years ago.
I could probably pick your brain on AI for a whole nother episode, and maybe we'll do that. I'll try to keep us focused on brand strategy here, because I feel like AI just kind of flows into everything. There's still a lot of unknowns. I feel like every day I talk with a client and they're trying to figure out what their stance is on it. People are at a variety of adoption rates. And
then it changes every day also.
Right? It's hard to keep up with. Okay, so let's put a pin in AI, but I do want to keep maybe charging ahead. So you've shared this story, you've got new leadership, you've been working behind the scenes for a couple years, kind of new brand launch, new messaging, some new tools, some new campaigns. You continue to evolve with intention, building that alignment. Where do you see things going? What's next on your radar? What are you most excited about? Like, obviously everybody needs to be following you guys on Instagram, because that's going to be the new fun campaign right now. But what else is going on in this next chapter for you, Emily?
Yes, no, we've got a lot to look forward to. We're working on a lot of really interesting things right now. I think if I could put a theme on some of the things that we are working on and have been working on, it is really leaning into the sort of this notion that entertainment is the currency right now.
Okay.
We've all been on Instagram, we've all been on social, and maybe not LinkedIn to the same degree. So I'll stay with Instagram. But you search through store, and it's entertainment. You could sit and watch a show, or you could sit and watch, whatever it is and trying to find people there and entertain them in a way that makes them feel connected. We're flexing that muscle. And we have been for a little while. Again, your point about the Christmas videos has been, it's a long-standing tradition. Yeah. We went a little bit of a different direction this year. Again, I mean, that's, very much a product of some of our new leadership and their vision and, what resonates with them. And I think truly with a lot of our audience right now. And so we're trying to figure out how to entertain as a way to build that connection. And again, to celebrate a lot of what the work really is. And I think you'll start to see some different things from us. It will probably be a little bit later in the spring or mid-year, but just again, I mentioned we really launched a new brand 2 years ago. And what does it start to look like? You think about some of these big consumer brands that I mentioned, and they really aren't the same from year to year or even from month to month. And it's how do we make subtle adjustments that give you the evolution and let that brand develop and live and mature in a way that keeps it fresh and keeps it interesting. I have a lot of interest in how to better activate our website. We, again, rolled out a website about 2 years ago. It's beautiful. Yeah. It largely looks like it did then. And, I think looking at some of our inspire, the brands that inspire us, that's not necessarily the case. If you go to Apple's website today and then again in a month, you're probably not going to see exactly the same thing. And so how do we blend some of this entertainment and some of this great content that we have just out there? Generally, we have a YouTube channel that if you're not following, you should, because it's very entertaining as well. But to better tie those experiences together. And certainly the website for a lot of people is not the front door to a company anymore, but it is still there. Yeah. And it shouldn't feel super disconnected if you've been on a YouTube and a LinkedIn and a Instagram, and then you go to brasfieldgorrie.com. You should see, it should feel cohesive. Well, and so we're gonna work and see what we can do about that.
I think you touched on a few of the key components here. Is the consumer world is huge and vast, and there's things that work really well in the consumer to consumer business. We're a little bit
Mhm.
different. It's B2B, it's professional services, it's abstract, it's complex, it's decision by committee, but there's a few underlying things that we all share as buyers and consumers. And that is we are curious by nature. You know, if I have connected TV at home, I think everybody listening probably does. You look at my YouTube searches, it's a variety of things of whatever's going on in my life and throwing a toddler birthday party to fuel farms and aviation. Like I am trying to be
Yeah.
as up to speed on all the things I need to know about and educating myself in ways that are interesting and helpful. And so that whole partnership of information, entertainment, having it be snackable, having it be available where people live, whether that's YouTube or Instagram, or you're right, like through these other kind of micro moments that really celebrate what's going on in the world. I've seen some brands do some really fun things that are just special for maybe a subset of their audience on their website to make them feel, like they're getting a moment in the spotlight, and that kind of quote unquote goes viral, right? I just start thinking about these different things. And you're not doing that with the intention of going viral, but really with the intention of connecting with your audience and showing up and being there when they need you, when they want you, and basically whenever you could. And finding that moment of connection through digital memes, I think is just going to continue to be something that we see shape brand strategy, kind of making sure that alignment is working so that when you experience something online and then you take it offline, whether it's in a job site trailer or, a kickoff meeting or whatever it might be, that you still feel like you're working with the same firm and you just didn't get, baited and switched. And I think that's where your role in kind of bringing all these different parties together is ensuring that you're not just saying stuff top line from a brand. You're instilling it internally. You're, shaping those opinions, those thought process. And then that's really how everything gets communicated and experienced on the back end when the people who are powering Brasfield and Gorrie are really celebrating your core values and the way that you think about things. And
no, absolutely. And Katie, I mean, your point about the B2B, B2C is valid. There is a lot of decision by committee in the B2C space, especially as you start to slice between sectors, but the psychology of influence is very interesting, and just, planting those impressions, planting those seeds of competence, of innovation, of whatever, the fill in the blank is, really has such an impact. And whether you're, the B on the B2B or the C on the B2C, it's still people, right? It's still a person ultimately, or a group of people. And so a lot of the principles definitely still apply. And so I think we've really tried, and I've really tried, even in looking at pursuit strategy over the years, of how do you make the statement? How do you connect with that reader on the other side? To read whatever they will choose to read. We want to make sure we could at least get, the message across of what they do absorb.
How do you connect with Mary, who's reading the proposal that's, going to say yes to us, and we're going to work alongside her and her team for 2 years, 3 years.
And we've all got the stories of, sitting in a client presentation where you can just tell you haven't connected.
And I mean, I think it goes back to, no one's going to buy from you if they don't know you exist, first of all, right? You're not going to get an at-bat, but you need to be seen. You need to be known in order to build trust. And the more and more you can make sure everywhere your brand touches is aligned and supporting that singular theme, the more consistency you'll have there in knowing that your audience knows who you are and whether or not they believe what you believe, and you're going to be a good fit.
Yeah. There's an anecdote that I love to share in settings where people understand. And I feel like this would be one. Yeah. And this has been 10 or more years ago. But we were pursuing a big healthcare project in the Carolinas. And, we had loaded up and driven up early in the morning to go present. And it was sort of one thing led to another. And we ended up with I don't know. I think they were an hour or more late
Oh, yeah.
starting, which, the nerves are up and you've got this crew who's just, everybody's kind of at a 12.
Yeah.
And it was a really unique interview setup anyway, but we like finally get to, the presentation piece of it. And where I was seated in the room, I was next to someone, and I can't remember if it was, she had her iPad up and she was shopping for socks. And I just knew then, I was like, she's sock shopping. We are not getting
She
this
is
job.
not listening. We have a lot.
We have not connected. And, that may or may not have been when we lost the job, if you will. But we've all had moments where you're like, I'm not connecting. This isn't resonating.
Yeah. The eyes glaze over. They look at their phone. They ask a question where clearly you just answered it.
Yes, right.
There's telltale signs.
There are signs.
But there are certainly things that we can do on the front end to make that a better customer experience for the individuals evaluating us. And we can do our homework and know who's across the table and find a way to connect with them, find a way to make what we believe something that they care about, use their currency, let them know that we've been thinking about it, at least start a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we both know well that sometimes the repetition, not because every day is the same, but sometimes the repetition of the requirements here and you got to hit this mark to get to the next mark. And then there's another one in the door.
Yeah.
But, really at the end of the day, the work, yes, but the work that we are doing and what it then enables these companies to do and, the economic development component of it, there's so much incredible that stems from these RFPs and putting these proposals together and going to these client interviews and having these strategy to win meetings. And, it's easy to feel like, okay, here we go again. What are our differentiators? What's going to make, but you really sort of zoom out a little bit and can put some context to it. It is an incredible industry, and from a marketing standpoint, it's an incredible way to be part of it.
I love it too. This is exactly what I wanted to talk about today. This is what I feel like the season needed in conversation. So I can't thank you enough for being here and sharing your story. I am going to ask you for one maybe parting piece of advice. Anybody listening today that might not feel like we don't know what our brand strategy looks like. Sure. What is the first step that they should take? What advice would you give them just to start 2026 off building towards an alignment or at least an understanding of what their brand strategy could be and should be?
Sure. I think I'm going to go back to that put your investigator hat on.
Okay.
And search the internet, search, your leadership interest. You've got to do the work. We've all got to do the work to understand what we're doing currently, how that does or doesn't match with what we want to be doing in the future. And then the piece is how to get there. But if you can separate yourself from, oh my gosh, the more that I unearth that we have to do means that there's more to be done. And let's just get our arms around what all there is to be done. You can go so far. I think if you don't have that sort of restrictor on, oh my gosh, every idea I have, I'm going to have to figure out how to also execute.
Yeah.
Because again, AI can do a lot for us. Smartegies, a company like this, a consultant like this in your corner can help with a lot of this. But if you could really just unearth what it is that you feel like is needed to change, to be amped up, to be dialed down, and you can start putting those things in play one step at a time.
Yeah.
When we rolled out the brand, we did not flip a switch. We had it very phased intentionally. We're also not a public company, and there's, we're able to do some things like that maybe there's restrictions otherwise. But in a lot of cases, if you're making adjustments to language, to visuals, you can do so in steps.
Yeah, you can pilot. And I think it's really great advice. I know a lot of our clients, when they're first starting out, the greatest value they get is kind of first putting that group together and having the conversation, because they've never had it, or they've never had it collectively,
proactively.
Right. And, sometimes it's the hardest conversation they'll have, and these are super smart people solving the world's challenges of, regenerative building and all the, power supply and all these things. But having a conversation about something that feels a little bit intangible, but very personal, related to the brand in which you work, just kind of being vulnerable and having some conversation around what they feel like is working and not working, where they want to go. And then, like you mentioned, start small, test a piece, do a little bit, see what works, add some more to it. You don't have to do everything. I'm a big fan of having a parking lot list. And, you can pick and choose when those might come in. And some of it maybe might not ever make it off the parking list.
Sure.
But
and knowing, the principles of so many of these firms, this is a squishy topic anyway. And it's just, especially if you've got someone who is not inclined toward it. But a lot of people can look at two things and tell you if they like one better than the other. And then if you can get them to tell you why. And so put up some comps, just test some things out.
And I
if you're having a hard time getting that conversation started.
If it's not just what they like, but how do they make them feel? What makes you feel more confident, proud, whatever it might be. But Emily, again, this has been so good. Thank you so much. I love
always a treat, Katie. Always a treat.
Congrats on the promotion. I'm so excited to see what you all roll out over the course of this year. And for all the listeners, thank you for sticking it out to the end. We will see you here next time, right back on AEC Marketing for Principals. Take care, everyone.